Shikamaru's days as Hokage are numbered. See, obviously, we've known for a fair amount of time that Shikamaru has been under a tight scrutiny from not only the Fire Daimyo, but also his right-hand man, Lord Kobu. But any and all chance that Shikamaru had of weaseling out of this bad situation is gone now after the events of chapter 31 of Two Blue Vortex. See, because up until the last chapter of Two Blue Vortex, there was no definitive evidence of a connection between Shikamaru and Boruto, and therefore no definitive evidence that Shikamaru was the person responsible for breaking Boruto out of his chakra-suppressing handcuffs. However, now that in chapter 31 the plot to kill Lord Kobu has fallen flat on its face, it has become abundantly clear that Shikamaru and Boruto are in league with each other, as it was Boruto who saved Lord Kobu from an onslaught of attacks from a team of Mamushis, establishing very clearly that Shikamaru and Boruto are working together to defeat the Shinju, which is a much closer relationship to Boruto than Shikamaru was telling Lord Kobu that he had. But now that the cat's out of the bag and Lord Kobu has pretty undeniable evidence that Shikamaru is working with the person that he believes killed Naruto, what's going to happen? Will Lord Kobu hold his tongue on Shikamaru and Boruto's relationship because of Boruto's saving of his life? Will he use this evidence to get Shikamaru removed as the Hokage and thrown into the stockades? And if he does do that, who, if anyone, will take over as the 9th Hokage? Well, today we're going to be answering all those questions and a whole lot more, because today we're talking the end of Shikamaru. But before we get to exploring anybody's end, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional NC Hammer 23 video every single week, guys, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We are getting to the final fights, and Naruto versus Neji is right around the corner. So there are a lot of possibilities that could play out in the future chapters of Two Blue Vortex to come. Futures that involve Shikamaru being replaced by another legacy Naruto character as Hokage, futures that involve Team Boruto and an open war against Konoha, and futures that depend on leniency from people who have never displayed that quality. And thus today, I want to explore the possibilities of Shikamaru's future from least likely to most likely. And therefore, unfortunately, the first possibility I believe we need to talk about is that Lord Kobu, after being saved by Boruto, comes to the realization that Boruto and those who set him free must have had some kind of ulterior motive that he doesn't quite understand. That is to say that the act of Boruto saving Lord Kobu's life from the team of Mamushi is enough to make him realize that he may not know everything there is to know about what's going on with Boruto right now. And thus, Lord Kobu's investigation into Boruto and Shikamaru and Konohamaru ends right then and there, or is at least momentarily paused while Lord Kobu tries to get more facts about what's going on with Boruto. However, not only would that be anticlimactic, but it would also be antithetical to Lord Kobu's character. See, he is a bloodhound sent by the Fire Daimyo, who is historically a massively annoying character, who's only ever concerned about how much the Leaf Village is costing him as opposed to how much good they're doing. And as Lord Kobu, in essence, exists as the Fire Daimyo for the purposes of Two Blue Vortex's story, he too is supposed to fit this archetype. And therefore, him simply seeing the light because Boruto saved him from a situation that he has no idea how he ended up in, mind you, just seems highly unlikely to me. On top of this, while being ushered to the infirmary by Sai under the direction of Shikamaru in the last chapter, chapter 31, he swore to Shikamaru that he would get to the bottom of this investigation, and that when he did, the Land of Fire would take action against Shikamaru. So it seems as though heading forward in this investigation, even if Lord Kobu thinks to himself, maybe Boruto's not as bad as I originally thought, his sights are still firmly set on Shikamaru. However, Shikamaru does have one advantage here, and that's that he has now displayed to Lord Kobu physical evidence of why he's still needed at the helm of Konoha. See, in chapter 26, when Shikamaru met with Kohaku, Homura, and Lord Kobu, who all chastise him for sending a team of ninja to the Land of Wind to battle against the Shinju without their permission, we see Shikamaru get in some hot water. See, because during this meeting, Shikamaru is urged by Kashin Koji to not tell the elders and Lord Kobu about his 10 paths ability, or even about the fact that he is the source that's been feeding him information about the Shinju. And thus Shikamaru has to essentially tell the highest level of authorities in the Land of Fire that his source for the information that led him to sending young ninjas to the Land of Wind is confidential. And because the American government, I mean the elders, others believe that there is a chance that Boruto is in league with the divine trees or the Shinju, and therefore that's why he's so knowledgeable about their biology, knowing things like their soul thorn placements and how to destroy them. They believe that the source of information that allowed for Konoha to strike against the Shinju could be Boruto. And while the logical response to, hey, Boruto gave us some private information about the weaknesses of the Shinju that allowed for us to launch a preemptive strike against them that allowed for us to kill 40% of their fighting force and also saved a Leaf Village Jonin in the process, would be, oh, that's weird. I thought he was a bad guy. Maybe we should talk to him and try and figure out what his intentions are, because even if he is a bad guy, using his ridiculous amount of power to fight this other ridiculously powerful foe would be advantageous to all parties. But nope, Emperor Trunt and Pambandai Kohaku and Homura yell at Konohamaru for trying to explain that Boruto put his life on the line to save his, and come up with the wildly inaccurate assumption that Boruto is feeding Konoha incorrect information in hopes that Konoha re-allows him back into the fold, and that when Konoha has lowered its guard to its lowest possible level, Boruto will stab them in the back. You know, like he couldn't just eradicate the entirety of Konoha probably faster than the Devapath did. Really, whenever he wants. However, because of the events of Chapter 31, it's been confirmed that not only is the threat of the Shinju very real, but also that Boruto is fighting on the side of Konoha. And more specifically, it's been confirmed to Lord Kobu. On top of all of this, after Lord Kobu was vacated from the roof of the Hokage's office, Boruto asked the Toad that Kashin Koji was talking through if Kashin Koji had specifically coordinated these events to allow Boruto to save Lord Kobu. And while Kashin Koji doesn't necessarily give Boruto an answer, he implies that while he does want Lord Kobu dead, what happened is not the worst case scenario, implying in some facet that if the best possible outcome, that being Lord Kobu dying, could not happen, then Boruto saving him would simply have to do. And thus, as Kashin Koji usually does, he seems to know something that we, the reader, don't. And that something is most likely the seedling of doubt that Boruto has now planted into Lord Kobu's mind, which will most likely blossom into something advantageous down the line. But will that something advantageous be Lord Kobu simply forgiving Shikamaru and Boruto? No. Most likely not. The most likely outcome is still that the clear evidence of a connection between Boruto and Shikamaru will lead to Shikamaru being labeled a traitor right alongside Boruto, which would not only lead to his immediate removal as the Hokage, but also probably his immediate imprisonment. But would or could either of those things actually happen? Let's for a second say yes. They could. Shikamaru could not only be deposed of as the Hokage, but also after he's deposed of will either willingly or unwillingly go to jail, where he will most likely remain until omnipotence is reversed towards the end of Boruto's story. What would Konoha look like if that happened? Who would take over as Hokage, if anyone? Well, there's some obvious answers, but there's also some less obvious answers. See, in the face of a Hokage vacancy, the kind that would happen if Shikamaru was arrested, there's seemingly one obvious choice to fill that gap every single time. And that obvious choice is a previous Hokage. Now, this has technically only ever happened one time before, when Minato died 2 years into his role as the 4th Hokage, and therefore Hiruzen retook up the role as the 3rd Hokage. However, because it's happened before, especially when there's no one else suitable to take the role, this is kind of what we assume is going to happen every single time there's an abrupt change in who's leading the village. And therefore, when Naruto was snapped away into the Daikokuten by Kawaki, heading into Two Blue Vortex, we believed the most likely person who was going to be leading the village after the time skip was Kakashi. Now, we were wrong, it was obviously Shikamaru, but now in a world where Shikamaru is gone, it seems rather clear that Kakashi would have to retake up the mantle as the 7th Hokage. 6th Hokage, he's the 6th Hokage. And this wouldn't be crazy at all. Kakashi's only in his 50s. He's still ridiculously strong, and he led the village for over a decade. He is more than fit for the role of Hokage, even if it is, once again, just to hold on to the spot long enough so that the generation that is currently up and coming can take it from him. However, on account of the fact that Kakashi did not take over as Hokage after Naruto's disappearance, and Kakashi's overall attitude towards the role of Hokage, which is at best indifference and at worst unwillingness, it seems though Kakashi is done leading. I mean, after all, when the 4th Great Shinobi World War ended, even though Kakashi was immediately elected as the 6th Hokage, it took him 2 full years to assume the role. Tsunade was essentially forced to continue doing the job of the Hokage for 2 straight years without the title. Not to mention that if Kakashi took over the role of Hokage from Shikamaru, we'd kind of be back in the exact situation we are right now. But what do I mean by that? Well, listen, I genuinely believe the reason that we haven't seen a lot of the major characters from Naruto, like Kakashi, Might Guy, Rock Lee, or really any of the Konoha 11 in any serious role in Two Blue Vortex, is because Ikimoto doesn't want to have to either write a way for them to be unaffected by omnipotence, or to have to display fan-favorite characters as openly antagonistic. Think about it. Every single major Naruto character who's been introduced over the course of Two Blue Vortex has either broken out of the effects of omnipotence or hasn't broken out of the effects of omnipotence, but are using their logic and their good hearts to see that Boruto may not be as evil as they believe him to be. Sasuke, Shikamaru, Sai, in fact, the only character from Naruto who's been shown as openly antagonistic to Team Boruto's cause is Ino, which is why I said fan favorite, because who cares about Ino? And therefore, if Kakashi was brought back as Hokage, he would either immediately fill a Shikamaru-esque role, taking up for Team Boruto in secret, or would essentially have to be written as a puppet for the elders. Something I genuinely think Kishimoto would kill Ikimoto with a hammer for thinking about writing. But if Kakashi's not going to take over as Hokage, then who's gonna do it? Tsunade? Well, yes, she is still around in Konoha. She is not only one of the greatest medical kunoichis in the entire world and is therefore just as genjutsu resistant as Sakura, but also she dedicated the vast majority of her short time as the 5th Hokage to flipping the middle finger to the wishes of the elders. I mean, this is the woman who actively went against the wishes of the elders that not only dragged Naruto into the fight against Pain, but also to drag Naruto into the fight that was the 4th Great Shinobi World War. She would never be the puppet of the elders. That is antithetical to her character. So who does that leave? It can't be Konohamaru, because he's already displayed to the elders and Lord Kobu that he is openly sympathetic to Boruto and therefore technically compromised. And if we're being real, there's no way it's gonna be Sakura. Now, could I see Ikimoto writing Sakura as an elder sympathizer who does whatever they want in order to keep Konoha funded? Yes, 100% I could. And that's not me saying it's within her character to do that currently, but boy oh boy could I see Ikimoto adding that on. And while Sakura taking over and abiding by the wishes of the elders could lead to some really interesting plot points, as the elders and daimyo threaten to strip Konoha of all of its resources, which could directly affect the employment and life of thousands of shinobi, weaken the fighting force of the entire ninja world in the face of one of the greatest threats it's ever had to come up against, and possibly shut down or massively defund critical Konoha resources like Sakura's hospital if she doesn't commit to capturing Boruto over literally everything else. Watching Sakura try and figure out the right path as the Hokage, taking the consideration of all the people who live in Konoha and how she has a duty to them as the Hokage to ensure that they continue to be employed, continue to be able to get health care and put food on their tables, but weigh that against the idea of weaponizing an entire village against a child could lead to some of my favorite talking points ever explored in all of Boruto. However, I just can't for the life of me see either Ikimoto or Kishimoto ever draw on that little hat on Sakura's head. And listen, while I would love to see it happen, even if it did come at the cost of a relative heel turn from Sakura's character as she tried to hunt down the killer of one of her best friends in Naruto, the idea that Sakura, the most genjutsu resistant person on Earth, being not only affected by omnipotence but also becoming the literal face of it, is slander of my goat that I simply could not stand for. So while this would be the most interesting possible angle, that obviously would end with Sakura revealing that she actually broke out of the effects of omnipotence by herself long before she ever took the role of Hokage, which would allow for her to unify with Team Boruto and make a final push against the will of the elders to recede control of Konoha for the good guys. That is a level of character writing that I do not expect from Ikimoto for Sakura. But if not Sakura, then who? Well, listen, I want it on record that all 3 of the people we've already talked about, Kakashi, Tsunade, and Sakura, could all happen. But I honestly believe that the most likely Hokage after Shikamaru's forced to vacate the position, well, there's no Hokage at all. See, in chapter 26, when Lord Kobu is reintroduced, he tells Shikamaru that the daimyo has begun to wonder that if the Hidden Leaf Village is even worth its cost any longer, now that the entire world lives in an era of peace. and then proceeds to tell Shikamaru that they could be discussing a whole lot more than just standard budget cuts today. And while this is most likely in reference to the investigation that Lord Kobu is actively launching against Shikamaru to try and find his connection to Boruto, it could also be foreshadowing massive changes about to come to Konoha, pulled in the wake of Lord Kobu. But then who would lead Konoha? Well, most likely Lord Kobu. See, the daimyos, and this is for all of them, not just the fire one, have an odd level of disdain for their hidden villages. The stone daimyo, during the blank period, tried to start a 5th Great Shinobi World War because he believed that ninjas were meant to fight and die, not exist in a peaceful nation. And it was up to Naruto and Shikamaru to ensure that this 5th Great Shinobi World War did not happen. The sand daimyo, or I guess technically the wind daimyo, in the Chunin exam arc was described by Baki as an incompetent Neanderthal who cut funding to Suna and sold ninja contracts to the Land of Fire, limiting the amount of money that Suna would be able to make for itself using ninja work. And now the fire daimyo is wondering if the massive expense of a fire village is worth it in an era of peace. And therefore Konoha could be completely taken out of the equation, as Lord Kobu fills the vacancy of the Hokage position and begins to slash funding for all of the ninjas, crippling Konoha in the face of one of its biggest ever threats. And honestly, from a writing perspective, this path has a ton of advantages. It doesn't require the demonizing of a legacy character like Kakashi, Tsunade, or Sakura. It grows the community's hate of an already despised character in Lord Kobu, and it increases the complexity of the argument behind Kashin Koji's attempts to try to kill Lord Kobu. But more than anything, it puts the onus on defeating the Shinju on Team Boruto and Team Boruto alone. And that's the thing. See, eliminating Konoha as an ally and actually turning him into an openly antagonistic foe to Team Boruto is infinitely more interesting than slowly but surely changing the opinion of every single important person in Konoha until eventually omnipotence basically meant nothing. But still, people have already been swayed. People like Shikamaru, Shikadai, Inajin. So if Shikamaru was deposed of as the leader of Konoha, what would they do? Well, that leads us to the idea that the fire daimyo isn't able to depose of Shikamaru as the Hokage. See, Shikamaru is massively beloved, and while I'm sure many no-name ninja would move at the direction of the fire daimyo at the drop of a hat against the Hokage, Shikamaru is backed by the vast majority of the strongest ninjas in the village. And if you think about it, there's probably a reason that the daimyo has never tried to openly get rid of a Hokage. Vast majority of ninjas in Konoha are going to show more fealty to the Hokage than the daimyo. Now, obviously, that can change if the daimyo and the elders are able to spin the narrative that Shikamaru killed Naruto in order to take the position of Hokage for himself. And we've even seen people in Shikamaru's immediate circle show either doubt in his plans or straight up disgust in his ability to work with Boruto, like Sai, who interrogated Shikamaru about what Inajin had to do with all of this, and Ino, who told Shikamaru that if he continued to work with Boruto that she would report him to the higher ups. But that being said, even though Sai and Inajin have seemed to be slightly antagonistic to Team Boruto's cause, Shikamaru has Inojin, their child, in his care. Something, mind you, that Sai now knows. Tie that into the support of Mitsuki, Saruda, Himawari, and the rest of Team 10, and Shikamaru has a legitimate fighting force, one that would be undoubtedly bolstered by people like Choji. So there's a fair to decent chance that Shikamaru could just continue holding on to the position of Hokage, even if the daimyo and the elders said that he shouldn't have it anymore. Or he could fight his way out of Konoha to continue acting as the tactical head of Team Boruto from some remote location. But would he do either of those things? Probably not. See, Shikamaru understands what omnipotence is, and therefore he understands that even the Konoha shinobi that are being affected by it are still good people. They're just doing what they believe is the right thing. And therefore, Shikamaru wouldn't want any Konoha shinobi injured in an attempted escape. And if Shikamaru forcefully held onto the position of Hokage, it would most likely mean that Konoha would lose its funding from the daimyo. Now, there's really no reason that the Hidden Village can't be self-sufficient. They're the most populous and powerful village in the entirety of the world, but that's still something that Shikamaru would have to take into consideration. So most likely when, not if, Shikamaru is eventually deposed of as the Hokage, he will willingly go to jail. However, Shikamaru being jailed will have the added benefit of pushing Team Boruto out of Konoha, forming a satellite team that operates outside the bounds of Konoha's legality in a battle with the Shinju. And therefore, Konoha will basically just become a representation of Kawaki, while Team Boruto will most likely be labeled as this generation's Akatsuki, rogue ninjas who apparently want nothing but the destruction of Konoha, but in actuality, they'll be the good guys. But then again, what do I know? I want to hear what you guys think is going to happen with Shikamaru in the position of Hokage. Tell me in the comments down below. While you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to be in my garage, touching tools.